The plane gleamed under the afternoon sun, its sleek silver body casting sharp reflections as it waited majestically on the private tarmac. This wasn't just any aircraft, it was a symbol of power, luxury, and exclusivity. Inside, the cabin was a seamless blend of elegance and extravagance. Plush leather seats, golden inlays on the overhead compartments, and ambient lighting designed to soothe and impress. Every detail had been carefully crafted to make each passenger feel like royalty. Passengers began boarding, rolling behind them expensive carry-ons, wearing tailored suits and designer sunglasses. Some were already sipping champagne offered by the attentive flight crew, while others scrolled through their devices or took selfies in their oversized leather seats. Among them was Amara Sinclair, a woman in her late 30s whose presence did not demand attention, but effortlessly commanded it. Dressed in a deep navy blazer, perfectly tailored slacks, and modest jewelry, Amara exuded quiet confidence and elegance. She didn't walk like someone trying to prove her worth. She moved like someone who already knew it. As she stepped into the cabin, her gaze swept the space with calm discernment. Her steps were measured, her shoulders relaxed, though no one recognized her yet. Amara wasn't just another passenger. She was the visionary CEO and owner of the very airline they were flying on. But she didn't need anyone to know that, not yet. For now, she simply wanted to observe. Standing near the entrance was Vanessa Clarke, the lead flight attendant. Vanessa was in her early 40s, her uniform pristine, her auburn hair pulled into a perfect chignon. She prided herself on discipline and control, and she had developed an instinct for who deserved warmth and who didn't. As passengers boarded, Vanessa offered smiles that varied in sincerity. For the well-dressed older gentleman and his wife, Mr. and Mrs. Raymond, she beamed. "Welcome back, Mr. Raymond, Mrs. Raymond. So lovely to have you with us again," she said with polished charm. But when Amara stepped forward, Vanessa's tone shifted. Her smile thinned. "Welcome aboard," she said shortly, devoid of warmth, her eyes barely meeting Amara's. Amara, calm and perceptive, noticed the change immediately. She said nothing, but her expression registered the contrast. She continued toward her seat without hesitation. Behind her, Mrs. Raymond clutched a delicate knitting bag, already preparing to start her project. Mr. Raymond, holding a neatly folded newspaper, glanced toward Amara with casual curiosity. Nearby, soft ambient music played, blending into the luxurious atmosphere like a whisper. As Amara settled into her seat, she crossed one leg over the other and placed her structured handbag beneath her chair with practiced grace. Around her, other passengers sipped champagne and adjusted their seats. From the outside, everything seemed perfect. But beneath the polished surface, a quiet storm was forming, one that would soon reveal how respect, or the lack of it, can shatter even the illusion of perfection. Vanessa Clarke, the lead flight attendant, stood near the front of the cabin with the posture of someone who thrived on control. Her uniform was impeccably tailored, every button aligned perfectly, and not a strand of her hair out of place. She scanned each passenger with a trained eye. Her smiles carefully rationed, generous for some, restrained for others. To the Raymonds, an older couple who clearly had flown this route before, Vanessa offered nothing but warmth. "Good afternoon, Mr. Raymond, Mrs. Raymond. Lovely to see you both again." She greeted them, her voice lilting with performative charm. Mrs. Raymond gave a polite nod, already pulling out her knitting needles, while Mr. Raymond returned a small smile and tucked his newspaper beneath his arm as he found his seat. Then came Amara Sinclair. As Amara approached, Vanessa's expression shifted. The smile that had just moments ago stretched so effortlessly across her face faded into something cooler, almost guarded. "Welcome aboard," Vanessa said. Her tone clipped, her eyes barely meeting Amara's. It was the kind of greeting that said, "I see you, but not really." Amara noticed it, of course. She always noticed. Her eyes caught the flicker of change in Vanessa's demeanor and the stark contrast in tone between how she was greeted and how others were welcomed. But her expression didn't change. She simply gave a calm nod and continued down the aisle toward her seat. The space buzzed with the quiet hum of settling passengers. Champagne flutes clinked, luggage compartments closed. A soft, ambient melody played through the cabin speakers. Vanessa moved down the aisle again, making her rounds like a queen inspecting her domain. She paused by the Raymonds once more. "Is there anything I can bring you before takeoff?" she asked, with a bright smile. "Mrs. Raymond shook her head gently without looking up from her yarn. Mr. Raymond nodded slightly toward his coffee, already content. As Vanessa continued walking, she passed Amara, now seated near the front. Her eyes flicked briefly to the handbag tucked neatly beneath Amara's seat. Her lips tightened. She said nothing. No offer of water, no polite check-in, no smile. She walked right past. Amara didn't react. She didn't need to. Her silence held more power than any confrontation could. She'd seen this kind of selective hospitality before, the kind that relied on subtle cues, on quick judgments based on how someone looked or what they wore. But what Vanessa didn't yet know was that she had just walked past the one person who had the power to change everything, not only for this flight, but for the airline itself. As the last of the passengers boarded and the cabin settled into quiet anticipation, Vanessa Clarke moved with calculated precision down the aisle. Her gaze lingered briefly on Amara Sinclair, now seated comfortably near the front of the aircraft. Something about Amara unsettled her. Maybe it was her poise. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, calm, composed, unapologetically grounded. She didn't fidget with her phone or glance around nervously like most others. She simply sat there, as if she belonged. And for some reason, that bothered Vanessa. Determined to reassert her control, Vanessa walked up to Amara with deliberate strides, wearing a thin smile stretched tightly across her lips. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her voice dripping with false courtesy. "I think you're in the wrong section." Amara looked up, her expression serene. "I believe this is my assigned seat," she replied calmly, her tone even and unshaken. Vanessa's smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "This area is reserved for our elite passengers," she said, the emphasis on the word elite barely concealed. Around them, subtle movements began to stir. A woman seated nearby, Vivian Langley, a well-dressed socialite with more curiosity than tact, leaned slightly forward to listen. Across the aisle, Mr. Carter Bennett, a clean-cut businessman with a composed demeanor, glanced up from his tablet, his brow creasing at the tone Vanessa used. "I see," Amara responded. "Then perhaps you should double-check the manifest before making assumptions." A flicker of annoyance crossed Vanessa's face. "I don't need to check anything," she replied sharply. "I know who's supposed to be here, and who isn't." The quiet hum of the cabin turned tense. Eyes began to shift. Passengers exchanged glances, the whispers starting to rise. Someone muttered under their breath, "Why doesn't she just move if she's not supposed to be there?" Another shrugged. She's probably trying to sneak an upgrade. Vanessa folded her arms and leaned slightly forward. If you don't move to the back of the plane, she said, now raising her voice loud enough for the cabin to hear, I will have to call security. Amara didn't flinch. She tilted her head slightly, her tone unwavering. Call whoever you need to, but I'm not moving. Vivian gasped, clearly delighted by the drama unfolding. Mr. Bennett leaned in slightly, his gaze now fixed on Vanessa, his disapproval becoming more evident by the second. Frustrated, Vanessa turned to the younger flight attendant standing nearby, Emily Tran. Emily, escort this woman to the back, she snapped. Emily hesitated. Her hands gripped the clipboard tighter, her knuckles pale. She glanced between Amara and Vanessa. The conflict etched across her face. Something about Amara's presence, her calm confidence, made Emily doubt everything she'd been told. Amara shifted in her seat, gently adjusting her posture. She didn't raise her voice or make a scene. You might want to think carefully about what you're doing, she said softly, her voice steady but carrying unmistakable weight. Vanessa scoffed, brushing off the warning with a flick of her wrist. I know exactly what I'm doing, she snapped. Now get up. Still, Amara remained seated, unmoved. She met Vanessa's glare with calm certainty. You shouldn't make assumptions about people, she said. Vanessa's smirk widened. And you shouldn't be sitting in a seat you didn't pay for. Amara said nothing more. Instead, she slowly picked up her phone, her expression as composed as ever, and typed something quickly. She then set the phone back on the armrest beside her with quiet finality. You're making a mistake, she said, her tone clear, neither angry nor afraid. Just certain. But Vanessa didn't listen. She didn't know she had just stepped across a line she wouldn't be able to walk back from. The tension inside the cabin was thick enough to cut through. Passengers sat still, eyes darting between the unfolding confrontation and their untouched drinks. The once luxurious atmosphere now felt tight and electric, charged by something deeper than a seating dispute. Vanessa Clarke, arms crossed and jaw set, took a single step closer to Amara Sinclair. Her voice rose above the ambient cabin music, now sharp and unmistakably hostile. I'm going to ask you one last time, she said, enunciating each word like a warning siren. Move to the back of the plane, or I will call security. Amara looked up from her seat. She didn't blink. She didn't raise her voice. Her posture remained elegant, almost regal. I've already told you, she replied calmly. I'm not moving. Her voice was even almost gentle, but it carried a quiet power that seemed to shake Vanessa far more than any shouting could. The tone wasn't defiant. It was final. A few rows ahead, Vivian Langley, ever the nosy socialite, gasped theatrically and whispered to her seatmate, Looks like she's trying to sneak in for a free ride. She made no effort to hide her words. Vanessa seized the moment, her smirk returning. That's exactly what it looks like, she said, folding her arms and turning to face the other passengers as if rallying support. We have rules for a reason. Some people just don't respect them. But Amara didn't rise to the insult. She didn't respond to the murmurs or defend herself to strangers who had already passed silent judgment. She kept her gaze steady on Vanessa, unmoved, unwavering. Emily Tran, the younger flight attendant, stood a few steps behind, her heart pounding in her chest. Her eyes flicked to the manifest clipped near the cockpit. Her fingers itched to pull it down, to prove what she suspected, but Vanessa's glare froze her in place. Emily took a timid step forward. Maybe we should just check the list she offered, her voice barely above a whisper. Vanessa turned sharply. What are you doing? She barked. Emily shrank back. I just thought I've got this under control. Vanessa snapped. You don't need to get involved. Emily stepped back, her cheeks flushing red with embarrassment. She clutched her hands tightly in front of her, biting her tongue even though her instincts screamed that something wasn't right. Across the aisle, Mr. Carter Bennett, the well-dressed businessman, leaned forward. Excuse me, he said gently, looking at Amara. Is everything all right? Amara turned toward him, her expression softening. I'm fine, thank you, she replied, her voice still composed, grateful, but calm. Vanessa spun around, tone icy. Sir, I'd appreciate it if you didn't encourage the disturbance. Carter didn't flinch. From where I'm sitting, he said evenly, you're the one making a scene. Vanessa's face flushed a deeper red. She turned back to Amara, now visibly rattled. I've had enough of this, she hissed. Either you move, or I'll make sure you're escorted off this plane. Amara met her gaze without the slightest hesitation. You can try, she said softly. The words were simple, but the effect was seismic. Vanessa's hands clenched at her sides. Why don't you just admit you're in the wrong seat and stop wasting everyone's time? But Amara didn't respond. She didn't touch her face. She didn't plead or argue. Instead, she slowly straightened her posture, folding her hands in her lap. Her composure remained unbroken, even as Vanessa leaned in closer, her voice rising with desperation. Finally, Vanessa turned away, muttering under her breath, and stormed down the aisle to resume her duties. Her shoes clicked sharply against the carpet as she passed the other passengers, tray in hand, but her expression betrayed her frustration. Back in her seat, Amara opened a book with a quiet sigh, as if the entire confrontation had been a mere inconvenience, not a public attempt at humiliation. She waited patiently for her drink as Vanessa served the Raymonds first, then others, completely skipping her. When Amara eventually spoke, "Excuse me, could I have some water? Please." Her voice was still as calm as ever. Vanessa glanced at her and sneered. "I'll get to you when I can," she replied curtly, striding away without another word. But Amara's silence, once again, said everything. Something was building, and Vanessa, though she couldn't see it yet, had just stepped into a storm far bigger than she was prepared to handle. The atmosphere in the cabin was no longer tense, it was electric. Whispers buzzed like static through the rows of leather seats. Eyes darted back and forth between Vanessa Clarke, whose jaw was clenched in visible frustration, and Amara Sinclair, still seated with impeccable composure. Vanessa paced near the front, tray in hand, her heels clicking against the aisle floor. She had just ignored Amara's polite request for water. But what came next wasn't just a petty slight, it was a calculated provocation. As Vanessa passed again, Amara shifted slightly to stretch her leg into the aisle. The movement was subtle, relaxed, not meant to interfere. But Vanessa, eyes sharp and simmering with resentment, chose to change direction at the last second. Her foot struck Amara's leg. The tray tipped, water glasses tumbled, a soft splash, followed by a gasp, and droplets scattered across Amara's lap and onto the floor. Vanessa drew in a dramatic breath, then shouted theatrically, "Watch where you're putting your legs. You've made a mess." The cabin froze. Amara looked down calmly at her damp trousers, then up at Vanessa. Her fingers brushed the water from her lap. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but steady. "You walked into my leg," she said simply. Then, with that same quiet authority, she added, "I've only asked to be treated with the same respect as everyone else. If that's too much to ask, perhaps you're the one who doesn't belong here." The statement hung in the air like thunder. Several passengers turned their heads. Carter Bennett leaned forward, his eyes wide. Even Vivian Langley, the socialite who had whispered snide remarks earlier, looked suddenly unsure. Vanessa's face turned crimson. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the tray. "You think you can talk to me like that?" she snapped, voice sharp, barely containing her rage, and then, without warning, she slapped Amara across the face. The sound echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. Gasps erupted. Carter stood halfway up from his seat, his face a mixture of disbelief and fury. Emily Tran dropped the passenger manifest she had been nervously holding. Her hands flew to her mouth in shock. Even Vivian clutched her pearls. Amara slowly straightened, her face stinging from the blow, but her expression calm, her dignity intact. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't flinch. She looked at Vanessa, her voice as clear and cold as glass. "You just made the worst mistake of your life." The words didn't need volume. They sliced through the air like a razor. Vanessa staggered back slightly, suddenly aware that she had lost control not just of the situation, but of herself. Amara reached for her phone again. Her movements were quiet, deliberate, and laced with a tension that now made Vanessa nervous. "What do you think you're doing?" Vanessa asked, her voice shrill. Amara didn't answer. She typed something quickly, then placed the phone back on the armrest beside her. She leaned back in her seat, adjusted her collar, and said, "You'll find out soon enough." Silence fell over the cabin. Even the ambient music seemed to fade. A minute later, the cockpit door opened. Captain Harris, the pilot, stepped out, his face pale and strained. His eyes scanned the cabin until they landed on Vanessa. "I need to speak with you," he said, his tone urgent. Vanessa blinked, caught off guard. About what the captain didn't hesitate. "I just received a direct call from executive management." He pointed directly at Amara. "This woman is Miss Amara Sinclair, owner of this aircraft, and the entire airline." The silence shattered into collective gasps. Vivian nearly choked. Carter slowly sat back, nodding to himself. Emily let out a shaky breath of relief. Vanessa staggered, her face draining of color. That can't be true," she stammered. The captain's voice was grave. "It is, and we're making an unscheduled landing." Immediately, as he returned to the cockpit, the whispers became waves. "She owns the airline. I can't believe this. Did you hear what just happened?" Amara remained seated, hands folded, gaze forward. The slap had not humiliated her. It had exposed Vanessa, and Amara hadn't even needed to raise her voice. She had let the truth do that for her. The cabin was silent, but the energy inside was anything but still. The revelation had landed like a thunderclap Amara Sinclair. The composed woman Vanessa had just publicly humiliated and physically assaulted was not only a passenger, she was the owner of the airline. Vanessa Clarke stood frozen near the aisle, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her expression unraveling. Her face had gone pale, her lips parted in disbelief. Passengers exchanged looks of disbelief and quiet outrage. The echo of the slap still lingered in their ears, now made worse by the devastating truth of who Amara really was. The plane touched down smoothly moments later for the unscheduled landing. Outside the window, a sleek black SUV pulled up directly to the tarmac. Its doors opened, and two impeccably dressed assistants stepped out. Jasmine Lee and Daniel Cross, their movements brisk, confident, and unmistakably purposeful. They boarded the aircraft with quiet authority. One of them spoke, their voice calm but commanding. "Miss Sinclair, everything is ready for your review." Gasps rippled through the passengers again. Even those who had remained silent up to this point could no longer hide their shock. Vivian Langley leaned to her companion and whispered in awe. "She's not just important, she runs the whole thing." Amara stood slowly, brushing her blazer into place. Every move was graceful and intentional. She turned to face the cabin, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and resolute. "My name is Amara Sinclair," she said. "I am the owner of this plane and of this airline." The words hung in the air like judgment. No one said a word. She turned her eyes to Vanessa, who stood paralyzed near the aisle, looking like a shadow of the woman who had strutted so confidently only minutes earlier. "Vanessa," Amara said, her tone calm but razor-sharp. "Your behavior today has been nothing short of disgraceful. You've not only disrespected a passenger, you've disrespected yourself and this entire company." Vanessa's mouth opened, but no words came. She finally managed a whisper. I didn't know." Amara held up a hand. "Exactly. You didn't know, because you didn't bother to treat me with the same courtesy you gave everyone else. You made assumptions. You let your prejudice and your ego cloud your judgment. Around them?" Passengers nodded in agreement. "Mr. Raymond closed his newspaper with a soft click. Carter Bennett crossed his arms with quiet satisfaction. Even Emily, standing nervously at the galley, looked both relieved and vindicated. Amara stepped closer to Vanessa. "There's no confusion here," she said. "You failed at your job today, not just in service, but in humanity." Vanessa's eyes darted around, desperate for support. But no one came. Not a single passenger rose to her defense. Amara turned to Captain Harris, who stood by attentively. "I want this addressed immediately," she said, "and I want to ensure nothing like this happens again to anyone." Captain Harris nodded. "Understood. Miss Sinclair?" Vanessa took a shaky step back, panic rising. "Please, Miss Sinclair, I didn't mean to." "You didn't mean to get caught," Amara replied coldly. "But you were, and now there are consequences." At that moment, two uniformed police officers boarded the plane. One of them approached calmly. "Miss Sinclair, we received your report. Are you pressing charges?" Amara didn't hesitate. "Yes. She struck me, in front of multiple witnesses. I expect her to be held accountable." Vanessa gasped, backing away. "Wait, this is a misunderstanding. Please, I didn't mean to." The officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for assault. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." He reached for the cuffs. Vanessa's face crumpled. "No, please, Miss Sinclair. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't mean." But Amara's expression was unchanging. "Your apology means nothing without accountability." Vanessa was handcuffed quietly and led down the aisle, a far cry from the woman who had tried to dominate the cabin just minutes earlier. Her confidence had dissolved into humiliation, her arrogance replaced by regret. As the doors closed behind her, Amara turned back to the passengers. Her voice, now softer but steady, carried through the silence. "To everyone here, I want to apologize for what you had to witness today. This is not the standard of service I expect. And I assure you, moving forward, every passenger will be treated with dignity and respect. Applause broke out, polite at first, then building. Mr. Raymond gave a small cheer. Even Mrs. Raymond paused her knitting to clap gently. A wave of admiration moved through the cabin. Amara turned to Emily. Emily, she said, her tone kind but firm. I saw your professionalism. I saw you hesitate for the right reasons. You'll be hearing from my office about a promotion? Emily's eyes widened. Thank you, Miss Sinclair, she whispered, her voice trembling with gratitude. Amara nodded, gave one final look around the cabin, then stepped off the plane, flanked by her assistants. The SUV door closed behind her. She had come aboard as a stranger. She left as a symbol of justice, and no one on that flight would ever forget her name. As the black SUV pulled away from the tarmac, carrying Amara Sinclair to her next destination, the cabin of the jet remained filled with a reverent silence. What had started as a routine luxury flight had become a lesson no one on board would forget. Minutes after the incident, passengers were still processing what they had witnessed. The woman they assumed was out of place had turned out to be the very foundation of the place itself. Amara, without ever raising her voice or returning insult with insult, had dismantled prejudice with nothing but truth, poise, and presence. Inside the cabin, the energy had shifted from discomfort to admiration. The crew moved with new precision. Emily Tran, now quietly glowing with the confidence of someone seen and valued, continued her duties with a grace that mirrored her mentors. Moments later, the intercom chimed. The soft voice of Captain Harris came through. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience and understanding. We will be resuming our journey shortly. On behalf of the airline and its owner, we apologize for the incident earlier. Steps are being taken to ensure this never happens again. The passengers exchanged glances, nods of approval, murmurs of support, and then, as if on cue, spontaneous applause filled the cabin. Back on the ground, in a private media studio days later, Amara sat across from a journalist during a televised interview. Her navy suit was as crisp as ever, her posture graceful yet grounded. She wasn't there to relive drama, she was there to deliver a message. The interviewer leaned in. Miss Sinclair, your story has gone viral. Millions have seen the footage. The way you handled yourself, it sparked a movement. What message would you like to send, especially to those who don't have your platform or power? Amara's gaze didn't waver. Her voice was calm and resolute. Respect is a right, not a reward. Everyone deserves dignity, no matter how they look, where they come from, or what someone else assumes about them. She paused. Leadership isn't about titles or control. It's about accountability. It's about setting a standard and upholding it, even when no one's watching, especially then. The interviewer nodded, visibly moved. And what would you say to people who face subtle discrimination every day, but feel powerless to speak up? Amara's voice softened, but her conviction deepened. I'd tell them, you don't need a position to stand in your power. You don't need wealth to command respect. You only need the courage to know your worth and to act like it, even when the world refuses to see it. Her words sparked a tidal wave of responses online. Hashtags like, respect above all, Amara Sinclair effect, and dignity is standard trended for days. Articles were written, policies were reviewed. Conversations began not just in airlines, but in offices, schools, restaurants, and homes. A few weeks later, Amara boarded another flight, this time on a different route. As she stepped into the cabin, the energy was warm, welcoming, and undeniably sincere. The lead flight attendant, a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a confident smile, greeted her with genuine warmth. "Welcome aboard, Miss Sinclair," she said. "It's truly an honor to have you with us." Amara returned the smile and nodded graciously. She took her seat, settled into the soft leather, and looked out the window as the aircraft taxied forward. The runway blurred beneath her, the sky wide open. This time, there were no confrontations, no assumptions, no condescension. There was only respect. And as the jet lifted into the sky, Amara felt a quiet peace settle over her. What had happened on that infamous flight wasn't just about her. It was about something greater. She hadn't simply defended her seat, she had reclaimed a truth that should never be questioned, that respect is not optional. It's owed. And through her grace, her silence, and her strength, she didn't just teach a lesson, she sparked a standard.